I have a conclusive point here. So if you're still with us, this is going somewhere, surprisingly. The New Age is a term that, I think it's become more and more dismissed in modern culture. Like it's almost like considered, or like people use the term like woo woo, right? Or,
New Age is almost derogatory.
It's almost derogatory. I mean, I think it probably is. I think I'm fair to
that's
say
fair.
Like, if someone says, "Oh, that's New Age," like it just comes across pejorative, and that's a damn shame in my view.
Right.
Obviously, I'm talking on the spiritual mystic podcast, but basically what the New Age movement is, from a scholarly perspective, is a lot of things happened in kind of the early 1800s all the way into the end of the late 20th century, that several things kind of happened all at the same time very quickly that created this overemphasis on mystic, interior, intuitive inner research, and the contemplative tradition kind of reawakening post the Enlightenment. Really, I mean, it was like the Enlightenment, scientific Enlightenment. What I say here in the article is religion kind of was reeling from this global shift towards rationalism and towards this scientific worldview. So what happened was really two things. Some religious sects regressed into orthodoxy, like hardcore institutional customs and puritanical, from the Amish to the Wahhabis. There's many sects that went kind of amped up the fundamentalism in response to the modern day scientific renaissance. And the other thing that happened is religion went more kind of spiritual and more mystical. And so that's what really these kind of New Age like antecedents are. And I'm just going to run through them. We can just shout out really quickly, but basically the American Transcendentalist authors were huge in America. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Louisa May Alcott, Walt Whitman. They were influenced by Kant and German idealism, which was all about like the inherent purity of the individual, personal freedom. The guidance of intuitive direction is like so, Emersonian, like, which is Eastern influence. They had early translations of the Bhagavad Gita, and they had early translations of those Hindu texts and Buddhist texts and stuff. So they were going, wait, there's more to religion than just this kind of eternal damnation stuff. It was getting away from that. Helena Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky, was the founder of the Theosophical Society, which you might have heard of, Theosophy. They very much, you can't really mention kind of history of mysticism without Blavatsky and the Theosophists. But they were really into Eastern stuff, and they kind of made their own organization, which is kind of a mystic misstep almost. And but they're very interesting, and they definitely did a lot of interfaith. Another word is called like syncretic or syncretistic, meaning like all are true kind of thing. They were the intellectual, the intelligentsia that were kind of early interfaith people. Annie Besant, Charles Ledbetter, and Krishnamurti. Krishnamurti is fascinating, who you might have heard of. He was a boy that they discovered, kind of like the Dalai Lama. Like they discovered Krishnamurti, and they were like, he's the new Messiah. Like the early Theosophists was wild. But anyway, he eventually rejected that, and he became his own kind of institutionalist meditation teacher throughout the 20th century. So that's my tidbit on the Theosophists. They're very interesting. Phineas Quimby is the originator of the term New Thought. Can you guys hear this baby? Just edit notes. Are we good?
No.
Okay. Good. All right, because he's playing. He's very not self-aware.
Sorry. Sorry, keep going.
Hey, we're recording here, man. Phineas Quimby's New Thought, and then Mary Baker Eddy's Christian Science, which you might have heard of Christian Science before. It was all about the power of the mind and its role in spiritual healing. Mary Baker Eddy healed herself and other people started to heal themselves with their own mental capacity. that's an antecedent of like New Age. Talked about Carl Jung earlier, you know, the development of analytical psychology and like understanding the conscious mind, the subconscious, you know, layers of psyche contributed to this stuff. And Jung also studied mysticism and comparative mythology. Edgar Cayce was a guy who, he was a Christian mystic, but he would give psychic readings in the early 1900s. He talked about healing and reincarnation and all these kinds of ideas. You know, I think I need to write more about this, but 20th century physicists, we talked about this, I think, in the metaphysical episode too, but a lot of like early quantum physics discoverers, I mean, even Einstein has some quotes that sound like pantheism. You know, they definitely had this like mystic thread among the early physicists. Max Planck and the consciousness as fundamental crowd, you know, I think contributed to New Age. Unitarianism, and that's Scott's, that's your domain. That's kind of what I think of UN school wise. Let's see, Unitarianism, I'm just like running through this really quickly because we're almost at the end, but Unitarianism was an early Christian denomination where they said, no, wait, actually, Jesus, he's a human being. You know, we're not born original sin. The Bible infallibility isn't, you know, every word in the Bible isn't true. There's errors, and let's acknowledge that. So there was kind of some progressive Christian denominations emerging in the early 1800s, even in America, that is useful and important. A lot of religious academics also helped to document and in some ways legitimize the esoteric. Max Muller was an early translator of Eastern sources. William James, who was this hugely influential Harvard psychologist and philosopher who wrote a book called Varieties of Religious Experience. I think it's like 1910. That was important to proliferation of mystic philosophy and New Age. Evelyn Underhill, mentioned her earlier. George Gurdjieff, I mentioned him. He was like this mysterious mystic philosopher in Europe. He influenced like intellectuals. And then also, you know, big extreme shout out and extreme gratitude for the arrival of Hindu swamis and Buddhist teachers to America in the 1900s. You know, they started coming over. We've talked a lot about Vivekananda and Yogananda, but there's so many more. There's a great book by Philip Goldberg called American Veda, and he basically describes, I think the subtitle is like From Emerson to the Beatles. Like, it's like how Eastern philosophy seeped into the American experience, and that was huge. But also Buddhist teachers. Suzuki set up the San Francisco Zen Center. Prabhavananda lived in California after Yogananda. We just started getting all these legitimate Eastern teachers in the 20th century. And then lastly, I think, you know, you got to mention the beat authors, Jack Kerouac, Burroughs, Ginsberg, you know, these writers and poets in the 50s and 60s. And then, you know, counterculture, obviously, of psychedelic use being more commonplace, and kind of Summer of Love and Leary and Ram Dass and Aldous Huxley and all those guys, you know, that all of those things contributed to like quote unquote New Age spirituality and like this larger appreciation for ancient beliefs such as shamanism, Vedic Tantra, astrology, channel literature, and kind of like, you know, not quite institutional religion and not quite scientific materialist atheism. Like there's a lot of stuff in between. I mean, I think this is kind of my main big point here is like there's so much richness to all of these traditions, and there's so much variation that, like, you know, I think a pretty dismissive take is like fairy tale mythology, like describing religion or spirituality is like, oh, those fairy tales are irrelevant. That stuff is ancient, and now we have technology and science. And it's like, that is like literally the thinnest read of, you know, such a rich spectrum of, you know, esoteric scripture, ritual, contemplative practice, and, you know, psychological understanding and philosophical theology and ontology. You know, there's just a lot to kind of legitimize a further investigation of this stuff and a further kind of appreciation of these teachers and teachings. And you know, you don't got to read all of them. I just read a bunch of stuff there, so like there might be some overwhelm piling up, and let me you know, dismiss that. But you know, it's kind of like if you relate to one, or if you relate to any of those lines or books or teachers, like, check it out. You know, try it for yourself. The experiential aspect, like does it make you a better person? Does it generate, you know, happiness and bliss, and, you know, undo aspects of your own limitation and your own obstacles? Because it might. I mean, it has in a way for me. I mean, you know, it's been a gradual journey, but it's been real. You know, it's definitely been tangibly effective in cultivating more higher states and more loving states for my fellow beings.
Well put.
Very well said. I was going to say, very well said.
My own testimony.
Yeah, even between the three of us, we've all found different, we all resonate with different texts, you know, like
and mine are better than yours. You know, yours are lesser than mine, obviously, but
of course.
Just kidding.
He's kidding.
Yeah, no.